Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing absolutely well. So guys, in this video we are going to talk about use context hook in React.js. So guys, we were learning context API from last two videos. If you haven't checked the videos, I will provide the link to the videos in the I button. Please make sure to check those previous videos too. So in the previous videos, what we have discussed was what was prop drilling and then how we have solved that problem of prop drilling using context API. Now, when we learned context API, in that we understood that there was something called as context.consumer through which we were consuming our context value. Now, in order to solve that problem and complexity of context.consumer, we have a hook that is called as use context hook that we are going to see in this video. So basically, these are the 4 steps that you are seeing on the screen right now. We are going to cover this in detail in this video. So before starting the video, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet. Also, I have created a complete playlist on React.js. Make sure to check that too. Let's start from scratch and quickly understand what is prop drilling and what is the problem that do we have in prop drilling. So in prop drilling, what we know is there is a hierarchy of components. So we have a parent component for which there is a child component, which is child A. And then in the similar way, child A also has a child B component. Then child B has a child component, which is child C. So in this way, we have a hierarchy of components. And if we have to pass any data from parent to child C components, there is no way that I can directly pass this data. So in order to pass it, what I have to do is I need to pass it from parent to child A, then from child A to child B, and then child B to child C. And this is only what is called as prop drilling, because what was happening is we were passing the props to child A and child B, where child A and child B doesn't actually need them. They are just taking the props from the parent component and it's passing over to the child. So in order to resolve this issue of prop drilling, we have understood the concept of context API. So in context API, what we were doing is we were creating a common context and any component can make use of the data from that context. So that was the main idea behind context API, and we have understood that in context API there were 3 steps, that is creating a context, providing a context and consuming the context. Also in our last video, we have seen that when we were consuming our context, when we have multiple contexts, our code was becoming complex in this way, okay, wherein we have to first of all consume one context. In that we were consuming another context and it was creating a nested hierarchy structure, which was very complex to understand. And this problem of nested hierarchy is only solved by using our use context hook that we are going to discuss in this video. So I will highly recommend that if you have not checked that previous video where we have discussed context API, please make sure to check that too. Let's now understand what is use context hook. First of all, use context hook is a React hook that is used to access the context value provided by a context.provider component higher up in the component tree, enabling components to consume that context without using prop drilling. So now let us see what this statement means. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this code that we have written in the last video. I'm also going to remove this context that we have taken and we are going to start from scratch. So now if you see, I have this structure where I have a main or parent component, which is my app component. Here I am just calling my child A component. Then in my child A component, I am printing one line that is child A, and then I am calling my child B component. In the similar way, in child B component, I am calling my child C component. So this is our current scenario, and here let me write some basic line as of now. And when I save it, and let's see it on the screen, we will be getting this kind of structure where first of all our child A, child B and hello is getting printed. Now let us understand this concept from scratch. So first of all, what we are going to do is we know we have to perform 3 steps, and the first step was to create a context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a context. So for that I will need a create context method from my React. So in order to create context, what we are going to do is we are going to write const and our context name, and we are going to write create context in this way. So in this way our first context is now created. I'm also going to create my second context in this way. So now we have created 2 contexts. Now first step is completed, that is creating a context. The second step is to provide this context. So in order to provide this, what we are going to use is we are going to use context provider. So here you can see what we are going to do is I'm going to write data.provider, and then we are going to provide the value, and this data.provider is going to wrap our component. So now what is the value that I want to provide? So name is the value that I want to provide. Here I'm going to write name. Also we have to export our context so that it can be used in our components. So I have now exported my data and data1 context. Now in the similar way, let us also wrap our child A component with our second context, which is data1. So now I have wrapped my child A component with both the context. First one was data and the second one was data1. Okay. Now let's go to our child component directly. There we are going to use this context values. So previously I have already shown you how complicated it was when we were using context.consumer, but now in this time we are going to use context hook. So first of all, let's import use context. Now what we are going to do is we are also going to import our context that we have created. So our contexts were data and data1. Now the next step is we want to get those values that we have passed, right? That is name and tag. Okay, before moving forward, I have forgot to provide the value. So I'm going to provide the value here, and the value that we want to provide is tag. Now we are going to get those values. So how can we get those values is we have to write const and then a name. You can take any, it is not a compulsion that you have to take the same variable name. Now we are going to write use context, and here we are going to write our context name. And in the similar way, we are going to get the second value, which was our tag. So here I'm going to use tag, and then I'm going to write use context and our context name data1. And in this way, we have got both the values. Now we are just going to write a simple statement. My name is, and then our name value, and we are learning tag. So you can see we have clearly got our values. That is, my name is Rahul and we are learning React.js. So you can see use context, how easy it has made our life, right? Previously, when we were using context.consumer, it was too complicated to consume a context. But now with the use of use context, it is giving us a very easier way to use our context value that we have. Okay, so this was the whole concept of use context hook. So guys, till now we have understood what is use context hook and how can we make use of it in order to consume our data from our context that we have created. And it was helping us a lot in order to consume our data. But let's now move forward and follow some of the best practices that are followed in industries to write the code for context API. Because till now what we have done is we have written all of our code in one single file, that is in our app.js. That is, we are creating our context here itself, and then we are providing also here itself. Okay, so this is not the best practice that we use in industries. So in industries, what we do generally is, let me show you. What we will do is we will create a separate file for our context, that is data context.js, and let us create this context there. Okay, not here. Let me remove this line from here, and here what we are going to do is we are going to create our context. So instead of data, let us give it a proper name, that is data context. Let us now also import create context. So I'm going to import create context. Also, we need to export this context here from here so that it can be used in our files. Let me import my context now from there. So import. Now I have imported my data context. Now the new name of my context is, instead of data, it is data context. Okay. And I also need to update the name here, and then in my child component also I need to update the name, and then here also. So once we update the name everywhere, it will understand that yes, your name of the context is changed. But there are still more changes that we need to do. So this is one of the ways that we can do, that is directly creating the context in a separate file. Also, there are some other ways. For example, what we can do is we can write an export. So basically, I'm creating a component in this file, and I'm going to return my return statement here. And we are going to get the children component, okay, in this one. And here I'm going to write the provider wrapper, that is data context.provider. Inside this, we are going to write our children. And also, we want to write our data value that we want to pass. So this is the value that we want to pass from our data context. So I'm going to write this, and then here we are going to write value and name. So in this way, we are passing this value. And now instead of writing this data context.provider, we can remove this entire statement. First of all, let us import data provider, and then instead of that line, what we can do is we can mention data provider. So now we have wrapped our components with data provider. Okay. Let's now see. So if you see, still our app is up and running. Okay, so these are the two things that we have already done here in this file itself. That is the first step. This was step 1, which was creating the context. This is step 2, which was providing our context. Now let's do the third step also in this file itself. What we can do is we usually consume our context using our use context hook, right? So there is a better way to do it. What you can do is you can create a custom hook in order to import it. So let me show you how you can do it. What we can do is we can write export const and then use data, and here. So what I want is, instead of writing these things, I want to write use data and all of the data will come. Okay, so what I can mention is I can mention use context here. Okay, and now we also want to import use context in this file, otherwise it will give an error. Once I save it, now I can just directly import custom hook that I have just now created. I can just write it over here. Okay, now if you see, our app is still running. So what we have done is, instead of writing it in this way, that is use context hook and then inside the context name, what we have done is we have created a custom component for that. Why this is helpful, let me tell you, because you know, right now we are only dealing in one child component, that is our child C. Just consider a scenario where we have 10 to 20 different child components where we have to get our name value. So in that case, it will be very easy because you don't have to import your use context in every file and then separately your context file. So in that way, you can just import your custom hook and you can directly make use of that, right? So in this way, it is one of the best practices that we follow, that in one file only, that is, you will create one single context file, and in that file only you will perform all the three steps. First is basically to create your context, second is to create your provider component, and third step is to create your custom. So in this way, basically your work will be very easy. So now we have understood how we can follow the best practices. Let us, for our revision, let's do the same thing for our second context also, which was data1 provider, right? So let us quickly create one new file, which is data1 context.js. Okay, and in this file we are going to do the same thing. First of all, let us grab this line from here and let us put it here, and instead of data1, let's give it a proper name, that is data1 context. And now we also need to import our create context. So step 1 is done, we have created our context. Now as a step 2, let us also create our provider component. So for that, let us write it in this way, but before that, let me export it, and let's now create our component. So const data1 provider. Here what we are going to do is we are going to wrap our component inside the provider. So first of all, let us write data1.context and then provider, all the childrens that we want to wrap. So children, okay, and here we are going to write children. So in this way we have wrapped. Now we also want to mention the data that we want to provide. So that is this data, that is tech. This is the value that we are going to provide. Okay. Also let us export this component which we have just now created. Now the third step also we will perform here itself, that is creating our custom hook. So let's create a custom hook, const use data1. Now here what we are going to do, we are going to write use context, and then inside that we are going to write our context name, that is data1 context. Let me also export this one. We have done everything. First of all, we have created our context. Second is we have created our provider, and the third is we have created our custom hook. Let us now update the code in our app component and child component. So here we need to remove this line, and I need to just import my data1 provider. Let me remove these lines and let us import data1 provider. Okay, so we are now going to wrap it around this data1 provider. So I have now wrapped it inside data1 provider. Next thing that we want to do is we want to go to our child component. Okay, and in this child component, what we are going to do is we are going to make use of our custom hook. I'm just going to import my custom hook first of all, that is use data1, and then here I'm going to write use data1. Let us save this, and also let us remove these extra things which are not needed anymore. So now use context is no longer needed in this file. Also from our app component, so this is also not needed. We also don't need to import this data context no more. So let me remove this and let's save this file. So if you see, now we will go on front end, everything will work fine. So what we have done is we have now followed the best practice. Okay, so the best practice was to create one single file for context, and in that file only do all the three things. That is, first of all, create your context, second is create your provider component, and third is to create your custom hook. Now there can be different scenarios. If you want, you can create separate file for this provider also, but that is your choice. So if you want, you can also create two separate files, that is one for creating the context and one for providing the context. So, and you can remove this component from here and put it in a separate provider component. But this is the most minimum and the easiest way of writing the context API code. I hope now you have understood it very clearly, how can we write the code in context API, and we have also learned the best practices that is used in the industry. So that's all for this video. If you found the video helpful, please give it a like and share your valuable feedback in the comment section, and thanks for watching the video.